All right. So good afternoon, everyone, and happy Monday. We welcome you to today's webinar where we're going to continue our discussion from last month's webinar on searching for the perfect QBR. We have our moderator, Ian McChord, with us, who is the CEO of Zorus and a well-known figure in the channel. He has had years of experience working with the MSP community and is passionate about driving innovation within the channel. Last month, if you were with us, Ian met with 3 MSPs for episode 1 of this series, where they all shared their insights on how they conduct their quarterly business reviews and any challenges they faced. It was a really great conversation that helped others learn how to conduct a thorough and effective assessment of their MSP's progress and performance with their clients. Our panel looks a little different today as we have our industry colleague, Alex Farling, with us. Alex was an MSP for 16 and a half years before he became the co-founder and channel chief at Lifecycle Insights. So he has a lot of exciting things to share with us today. Before we start, this webinar, as you might have just heard, will be recorded and it'll be available on our website within the following weeks. Questions are welcomed and encouraged. So at any time you may leave one on the side panel and we will answer them live toward the end of the webinar. So Ian, take it away. Let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And thanks everybody for joining. And thanks, Alex, for coming on here. We're on the hunt for the perfect QBR. And so I have to first just say, Alex, do you think that the perfect QBR exists?
No, it does not. I think that's a tough question, right? Because not only does it depend on the client you have in the room, what you present, how it lands, the value you deliver back to your customer, but it also that message is different for every person in the room, right? The CEO cares about risk. The CFO cares about how we're going to pay to manage risk. Those are 2 different conversations, and we have to deliver enough of the right information to satisfy both. So it is a really hard chord to strike. My answer to that would be, let's just aim for the better QBR. And as long as we're doing 1% better every time, by the end of the year, if we're 1% better every month, we're 50% better in 2024 than we are this year. So gotcha. I think it's that forever iterative process. We encourage folks not to get stuck in the mud and just to continue to, turn it up 1 notch every time. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Get something out there, talk to your customer about value, and then iterate as you go.
Gotcha. So tell me, let's introduce Lifecycle Insights a little bit, because I believe that probably is part of your core message, is making the better QBR. So help me understand how you got started with it, where the idea came from, and where it is today.
Yeah, our core message is kind of, we help your QBR suck less. We know they're a painful process. It's not fun for anybody. I think there's actually an industry term around cobbling together reports from multiple different platforms. When I had an MSP in Delaware, I sold it in 2020. But when I had an MSP in Delaware, one of my biggest struggles was to have a non-technical account manager and a technical account manager deliver the same conversation to the customer. And we wanted them to feel that the experience was similar no matter who in our organization delivered it. We wanted to make sure that our organization's methods and our way was apparent to the customer, and they knew and understood what our goals were for them and how we were helping them achieve their goals. So it was really important to us that we have that unified message. But on top of that, sitting over top of my desk in my office was a sign left over from about 2008 when I bought LabTech from, a couple of guys in a garage in Ohio, one of those fellas. But, when we bought that, we put a sign up in the office that said, if you have to do it twice, automate it, right? So we buy this fancy automation tool back in 2008. We're writing scripts to do everything else. And then QBRs are manual combinations of spreadsheets and Word docs and reports out of all these different platforms. And it just wasn't sustainable. We couldn't deliver an expected outcome. And what I did when I delivered it was way different than what Ross or Kelly did when they delivered it. So we've got this team of 3 people kind of sharing a responsibility, and we had to find a way to almost put up the bumpers on the bowling alley and get everybody going the same direction, even if there was a little wobble down the lane. And that was kind of where this idea was born. And it started with the concept of just consolidated reporting. Take data we know we already own, extract it out of those tools, and do a little more with it. And so we started with that, and then it just continued to evolve after we worked with customers into scheduling and best practices and budget forecasting and some of these other things.
So the question that I have for you, and I'd say, first of all, do you agree or disagree to this statement? The statement is, do you believe that QBRs are more important now than they were 10 years ago?
I would say that their importance hasn't changed, because I think that we've undervalued them for the last decade. I
Okay.
think that when I sit and talk with folks who are in sales and who are MSP coaches, when I sit and talk to them, they tell me their average client comes to them charging $60 to $65 a seat. Now, in my MSP, that number would have been gross. Like, we never would have been able to sustain the amount of account management we had if that's all people were paying. So what we had to do was, we had to realize $125, $130, $135 a seat back in 2019 on average, not at our best customers, but on average. And so in 2019, we had a client that was paying $300 a seat. Before we had, the crazy security stacks of today layered on there. And that comes from being in front of our clients and having good conversations with them, making sure they understood not just that we were here to apply patches and perform backups, but we were here to make the wheel that is their business run rounder and faster and smoother than it ran before we got here. And so you can't do that without having real conversations with them on a regular basis. And it's about more than just, did we put a warranty on the server, and we patched all the patches and blocked all the anti-spams and those kind of things. So I think we've undervalued this for a long time. I think it's finally bubbling to a head with legislation and some of the other things that are going on, that we're no longer able to avoid it. I don't think it's any more or less important.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That's interesting. I mean, because then I guess what obviously comes to my head is, in 10 years, do you think it would be more important or less important, or is it always it's just the most important? I mean, how does it change with the way that
I don't think it does.
Technology's changed?
I don't think it does. I think what you're going to talk about in some of those meetings changes, but that's the same as every leadership conversation in every business around the world, right? We deal with the thing that's hot today in that leadership conversation. We have, as MSPs for decades, been trying to learn how to become this strategic advisor. And now we finally come up with this term VCIO, and I could go down a rabbit hole about that one for days. But we've been trying to become a member of our customers' leadership team for years. We've been trying to get that level of respect. We've been trying to have that level of input, and we've failed miserably because we spent all of our time just trying to justify our existence. That's not going to change in the future. There will always be ups and downs. There will always be the next thing that's changing. If you think about the MSP business, there's always this conversation that, oh God, this thing's going to change the shape of the business forever. First, it was managed services, and first it was going from break fix to VAR to then managed services, and now this VCIO and all of the advanced stuff that we're working on. But MSP is always in a constant state of change. The only way we can communicate that with our customer is in a meeting, and our customers do business with people that they know, like, and trust. So if you're not talking to your customer, building that trust, somebody else is, and you'll get replaced.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that fundamentally. I do think that there is one sort of variable that we haven't talked about, which is SaaS apps. I mean, I do think that SaaS apps are changing the way that the MSP landscape looks like. And I think that, when I look at the technology scope in the last 20 years, what I see is that it's become wider, but not as deep. And that it was before, an MSP is really charged to solve some really, really hairy technical challenges and building an entire IT stack. And that was, in a lot of ways, like, unreplaceable, because the business owner couldn't do that on their own. They couldn't install the server, put all the applications on it, set up all the users, set up the exactly. Like, they really just couldn't do that very well on their own. Now, a business owner does know how to buy a SaaS app. We buy SaaS apps all the time personally for our own stuff.
Yep.
So I think that the landscape has changed in that way, and that, the QBR is at the utmost importance, because I don't think that MSPs from the customer perspective are viewed as, this sort of guru, and instead now they're looking for like an active partner in it. And so that's where I think that the QBR is actually more important than it was in the past. But I guess I see where you're coming from, in that you could have gotten replaced by another MSP, but now it seems like you could get replaced by a couple of different scenarios that just didn't exist in the past.
Well, but I think SaaS applications are also going to, in the very near future, and we're starting to see the beginning of this, drive customers back around to the MSP. Because what's happening now is insurance providers are coming out and saying, not just do you have MFA on Microsoft 365, but do you have MFA everywhere? Are you taking inventory of and managing accounts everywhere? And most MSPs who we talk to say, oh yeah, I went into my client and asked them how many SaaS applications they have, and they told me 4. And then I went and did some digging and some monitoring, and we found 27, right?
Yeah, that happened at Datto too.
It happens everywhere.
It was the CEO. He asked the CFO, said, how many SaaS apps do you think that we're, paying for? And she answered like 8, and it was like 70. I mean, this is when we were a small enterprise, but yeah, no, I mean, it's shadow IT. It's, it's employees. It's a Wild West with SaaS apps, and company data is being sent all over the place there. And so, I do think that loops back. That's an opportunity for MSPs. But how do you feel like the best way for MSPs to take advantage of that opportunity is? And where do you see that coming from? And how do you see that evolving?
One of the best conversations our partners are having with their customers today is, when does your cyber insurance renewal happen? Right? Because we're going to get surprised with a list of questions. It could be 15, it could be 50, depending on your insurance carrier. But just, hey, when does that renewal happen? Because, Mr. Customer, what we're seeing across the space is that as these insurance renewals come across, not only are they more expensive, but there's more requirements. There's going to be things that you have to do in order to be able to even get insurance. And one of those is going to be have MFA on all those SaaS apps. There's going to be a handful of them. And we want to make sure that you've got all of those ahead of time, so that in the 15-day window or whatever, where your insurance is about to renew, where you get declined and canceled, we can make sure that we check all those boxes. And what we're finding is that, as folks start to have this conversation and they're actually reaching out to the insurance companies ahead of time and going, hey, let me get a copy of that questionnaire so we can make sure we're headed in the right direction. They're able to have a conversation with the customer now that is, I know you thought I was always the bad guy harping on all this security stuff, but now someone else is going to require it. And so we need to get out ahead of it, and we need to start. But that begins with, and I just was out in Chicago and presenting with Wes Spencer from Fifth Wall, and we had this big conversation about the insurance companies come to you and say, do you have MFA everywhere? They never stopped to ask, did you inventory your SaaS applications to even know where everywhere is? That question never makes the survey. It's just assumed.
Well, and I want to take like just a little bit of a turn on this conversation, because I totally agree, right? So I think that, I think there's 2 angles that the QBR you're looking to satisfy. Like, one is on the side of, where you're going at here, which is requirements, and making sure that you're communicating effectively with the customer of like, did you know that you need to do this insurance, you need to have this, and you need to know where your data is, and you need to know these things. And these are sort of check boxes that you have to do. And if you're not doing them, then you could be at risk, of losing your whole business, right? So that's one side of the QBR. Now, I'm interested on the other side of the QBR, which is, this is making your business better, that you can feel it. Like, not just that you're being compliant, but this is actually like making your business more efficient and really improving the business owner's, role and the company as a whole. And
it's about improving outcomes. Right.
Yeah, like, where do you see in good QBRs where there's an engagement level between the business owner and the MSP? What subjects do you feel like is most engaging for them, for those 2 parties together?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is client goals. And most MSPs forget to go to their client ahead or never had the thought to go to their client ahead of time. But I'd be interested to see a show of hands on the webinar. How many of you guys send an agenda to your client ahead of time and say, hey, Mr. Customer, here's 4 things that are important to me, but would you answer some questions to me to let me know what's changing in your business? How are things different today than they were yesterday? How are you handling the potential recession coming on? Have you fully recovered from COVID? Do you have plans to grow, to acquire someone? Are we adding to the business? Are we shrinking? Are we trying to use technology to replace people we had to lay off? And so understanding where the client is in their journey helps me help them deploy technology in ways that make their life better and really improve the way that they ring the cash register. One of the most important things to do in the QBR right is knowing how your customer rings the cash register.
Mm-hmm.
How many of us have gone to our client and said, before we get into all the technology stuff, just talk to me about how you make money. Because I'd like to make sure that as I deploy technology in your environment, that not only do we not get in the way of you making money, but that we support it. Because security is, by definition, inconvenience. And if we inconvenience them too much, we damage their ability to ring the cash register.
Yeah, I mean, strengthen their strengths. We spend a whole lot of time, and I do this with employees all the time, is that we spend a whole lot of time thinking about what we're bad at. But have you ever thought about like, what are you good at? And like, what your business to that business owner, it's like, okay, yeah, how do you make money? And why do you beat your competitors? let me bring technology to make you even better at that.
Yeah.
Let me bring you new applications to make you that much smoother and sexier at doing that. Exactly that,
And the MSPs that are absolutely killing it are going in and selling project above and beyond their all managed services to help their customers integrate, an application that is core to their business to a CRM that lets them sell, or, do some of the stuff that we spend a ton of time doing internally in our MSPs, right? We connect all these APIs, hook everything up, pass data back and forth. We don't do any of that with our customers, right? So there's a huge upsell opportunity there for project work to go out and get billable by the hour work that makes you just rings the cash register for you over and over and makes your customer love and appreciate technology. And if you're helping them make money, guess what? They have money to spend.
Yeah, no, and I see a world where, that project work, SaaS apps come together. I mean, I hate to see customers, I hate to see clients buy SaaS apps without the MSP involved, because they're not part of that. And then, they'll even pay a contractor to then, essentially get the app all running and set up, and or moving from Marketo to HubSpot or whatever, like these kind of things. The MSP is completely out of the loop for these deals, and there's a lot of money changing hands, and there's a relationship being built between these two parties, and that the MSP is just not a part of. And so I'd love to see.
And there's even a liability there if you think about it.
Oh,
What's
yeah.
the liability for the MSP if you help the client, somebody gets fired, somebody leaves the company, whatever, you help the client offboard that user, but they had access to 7 applications you didn't even know about. And there's some crazy stat out there that says 70% of people or 50%, I don't remember what the number is. It's an insanely high percentage of people that felt like they still had access to corporate resources after they left a job.
Yeah.
As MSPs, if we're in the dark about what applications exist, there's no possible way we could do a good job of offboarding that employee and helping the client manage, recovering access from tools that employee shouldn't have access to anymore.
Well, I mean, so now, you're kind of scratching on the surface of what, we've been talking about a lot here at Zorus is people data.
Mm-hmm.
Is it time to really start bringing that fleet wide, that, you've got some access to understand how the client's users are interacting with the IT stack, which you're responsible for deploying as an MSP, you're responsible for deploying an IT stack. And, when is it time to start understanding how are they using it, and the usage data, is that, a missing piece for a lot of QBRs.
Usage data is a missing piece for most QBRs. And that gets into a lot of interesting conversations. You get into, hey, we buy a Microsoft Business Premium license for all of our users, but then we bought Zoom for 10 users and it was $30 a month or whatever we pay for Zoom. I don't even know anymore, but we bought it for all these users. Who actually uses it? Who do we really need a license for? Yes, everybody has to have a mailbox, but that's not the same. Every application that our clients have doesn't have to go to every user. And if you can track usage, if you can track people data, then we can go back and true some of that up occasionally and go, hey, Alex hasn't logged into Zoom in 4 months. He doesn't do any real work. So, get that sales guy out of Zoom and let's not buy that license. And guess what? For once, an MSP can actually save money for their customer. I know that's weird and different. We're usually the one that costs our customer money, but we can actually help them manage expenses and save money. And when we approach it from that standpoint, all of a sudden we're building that trust factor that lets us move beyond just the guy that turns the screwdriver and into the guy who has a valuable impact on our client's business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the saving money. And then the other question really becomes, if you thought about an RMM before an RMM existed, and sort of saying like, man, it'd be great if I knew what all of these devices were doing, and which ones were the closest to essentially just falling apart or crashing or whatever, right? Like if you think about, somehow thinking about people data in that same way, I mean, you've got probably, one of your clients' finance department is one person, and this person's way overloaded, and you look at it, it's like, oh my God, they worked an 80-hour week. I would tell you that employee's just not going to be part of that company for very long. Like at some point they're going to crash. And so, and the business owner basically says, I didn't know. And, you can't really argue if they didn't really know. And so now it's like with an RMM, you always think like, oh my God, how could I deploy a piece of hardware and not be able to see what's going on? And now I'm thinking about, okay, how can I help these business owners with essentially the employees that they're working at the company. How can I make them more efficient, or how can I reward them, or how can I spread the load, or how can I make sure that they don't leave? Because attrition's the most expensive part of running a business. Is
Right.
You lose an employee, it's like, oh my God, regrettable loss. It's something that our investors talk about all the time as being, some of the biggest risks to a business is, because a business is a collection of its people.
Yeah, it really is. And that is, there's another inventory that we have to make sure we're doing, right? Who are the people that we support? And that leads us into that user conversation. Shane's got a couple questions up here in the chat we probably should address as we go along. So
let's do it.
We've got, how do we sell them items in these meetings if these meetings aren't supposed to be sales meetings? And I love that topic. And then we get into, how do we use these do we use these meetings for educational items like the needs for MFA, or do we create separate meetings for educational topics? So we can kind of roll into those as we go, or we can pick that apart now. It doesn't really matter.
Let's pick that apart right now. Because I do see that the first, how to frame a QBR conversation, and that it's not a sales meeting, it's not speeds and feeds, because they don't want that really. Like, what would you say is the best way to frame what a QBR is?
Yeah, so a QBR really, at its highest level, is about getting their entire strategic leadership team together and making sure that they understand the risk, the cost, the status quo, and what a future roadmap looks like for technology within the organization. And so if you look at those pieces, what we have is, where are we starting? And I like to go in this order. And I tell folks, you don't have to steal my order, but do something where there's a clear transition between each talking point, because at the end of the day, if we turn our QBR into a story, then it doesn't feel like a sales pitch. So I always start with, here's where we're at today. So if I'm sitting down with Zorus, hey, Ian, look, you and your leadership team should see this. I want you guys to understand where we're starting today. These are kind of the unaddressed risks. We've aligned them with the CIS standings, or with NIST, or with some real responsible framework. And this is where you're out of line with those best practices. And here's the exposure that might leave for your business. And that's the education component, right? We're doing a little bit of education as we go. And your customer will stop you and tell you if they don't agree, don't understand, don't want to be bothered with something, and then we can delve into it. But yes, I think this is the meeting where education has to happen, because done right, we're doing this with the entire leadership team at our customer, not just one point of contact. And if we can get the entire leadership team educated and understanding why it's important, we bring them along from status quo. I always like to follow that with budget. If we don't change anything, here's the budget you're going to need for technology. And I want to delve into budget in a minute, because it's probably my favorite report.
I mean, and where in the QBR are you talking about budget?
Right up front. I mean, we'll start with status quo, and then here's your budget. And I present them a budget. I don't ask them to deliver me one. I've worked with my client to collect enough information. I know what they spend for all their third-party vendors. I know I know when their annual website renewals due, and their certificates and all the silly stuff. But I also know when their cyber insurance is due, and how much they spend for data destruction services, and how much they spend on copiers and internet circuits. All that goes into the bill, right? If you want to pretend to, or into the budget, if you want to pretend to be a C-level executive at your customer's organization, if you're a VCIO, you damn well better take accountability for an entire department. We can't just go in there and go, here's a list of the invoices I'm going to send you this year, Mr. Customer. Call that a technology budget and let's move on, because that feels like a sales pitch. If I make it about them.
Here's, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no.
I got another question.
If I make it about them, all of a sudden I'm helping their team have a real conversation around budget, instead of saying, this is the money I'm going to need to extract from your bottom line this year.
So the question I have is, how do you make sure that it doesn't feel like I brought my car in for an oil change and now they're telling me all these other things I have to do?
Yes.
I think that's where the QBR falls off for a lot of MSPs, is that it does feel like, dude, I went in for an oil change and now they're trying to get my fluids flushed. And it's like, the business owner thinks that they're getting taken to the cleaners because it's like all these certificates and all these things, and they're new and they came up out of nowhere. How do we avoid that? How does an MSP avoid that?
Well, I think the first part of that is just being honest with your customer and saying, hey, Mr. Customer, I apologize. This is probably this budget thing is something I probably should have been doing the whole time. This is something we probably should have delivered to you along the way. And you know what? The tools in my organization, as much as you'd think IT guys have all the best tools, they haven't always been the best. And it just wasn't realistic for me to be able to collect and manage all of this information. However, in the last couple of years, vendors in our space have started to build better tools. And now I've gone out and invested some money to make sure I can deliver more strategic information to you. And now I have the tools to do this. So I'd like for you to come with me on this journey where we start to kind of collect up some of this information, put it in a better fashion that's more reportable to you, that gives you a better idea of where we're going. Because really, it's our customers aren't upset with us for selling them something. They understand they have to spend money on technology. What they're upset with us for is us not telling them they were going to have to spend money until the bill was due, right? They're tired of us going, surprise, I'm here again. Can I have 20 grand? And as we start to build the budget, there's this interesting thing that happens. And I call it the Windows XP cycle. But what we see is, this big ebb and flow in the budget, right? And it goes up and down like a sine wave. And what it is back in the day, we didn't replace anything until Windows XP died. And then we went to our customers and said, Windows XP is dead. I need 40 grand. They bought all new computers. So then they didn't need to replace anything for 5 years. And then Windows 7 died and they did the same thing again. And then Windows 10 is going to die and they're going to have to do the same thing again. It's a cycle of unpopularity for the MSP, right? I need all your money. I'm super unpopular. Oh, everything's brand new. Everything works wonderfully. I'm popular again. And so if we can put that out in front of them and say, hey, Mr. Customer, I know it's only February 2023, but I noticed that 2025 is going to be kind of a bad year for you. And I just wanted to let you know ahead of time. I wanted to put this in front of you. And just ask, are we going to be able to make it through that big hump in spend? Do we need to break some of that up? Do we need to address financing options? How do you, Mr. Customer, want to address that fiscal cliff that's coming in 2025?
But what about, I think you're spot on there. I mean, I think you're spot on. And that's that stakeholder management. That's, the no surprises. Yep. But what about the positive, I guess? What about telling a business owner, giving them some value in the QBR itself and saying like, here is, like, we had an uptime that we talked about doing, here it is, or, here are what your people are doing and interacting. We installed this new app and they're all using it and they're using it, for a lot less time because they were using Excel. And then we brought in, a proper finance system and look, now they're using, their usage is down. They're doing more with their day. Like, is that a component to it too? And how do you see that in its importance?
It absolutely should be. And it's something that when we see clients using it well, they're using it up right in the beginning, right? Hey, Mr. Customer, let's go over what's changed since we were here last. And that is, we finished this project, we migrated you to 365, or we deployed that new finance app, or we did whatever. And the team is using it and they're having success, right? Here's what better looks like.
Right.
And that's a great portion of it. But it's one of those things where we have to be careful with it, because if we go in with something like uptime, that's a really scary metric, because you can sit in front of your customer and say, you had 5 nines of uptime. And they go, well, yeah, we did. But the 5 minutes of downtime we had were when Ian was trying to connect with that multi-billion-dollar potential customer. And that's really all I care to talk about. Well, Mr. Customer, I met my SLA. We did great. We did awesome. But that's about me. And it's not about them, because if we had downtime and it was at an inconvenient or terrible time, we're almost better off not to talk about it.
Yeah, right? I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I think
and so we almost encourage MSPs not to set the table with KPIs that could come back to bite you in the face. We have a partner who calls it the service level argument, and he says if you're talking SLAs, you've already lost. And I think he's right. So we really try and stay away from that. So we really try and manage this framework from kind of a status quo to budget to next steps, remediation planning, future planning, and really add some of the, I'm going to call it fluff, but it's not really, add the customer valuables, like, what's better than it was yesterday, where have we improved, where have we changed along the way as we work our way through that.
Gotcha. And, when you think about how a QBR sort of factors into an MSP versus MSP in terms of, because I see in the landscape nowadays that, I think there's too much competing on price between MSPs in the same area. And I think that that's a dangerous game for an industry to be doing, because it's a race to the bottom and everybody loses. So, how can a QBR change the way that MSPs essentially go for the same client?
If we're doing it right, we're showing the customer that we're more than just a hosted help desk. Help desk is the commodity feature that's going to force us to compete on price. Right. I can answer the phone the fastest. I hire the best people, right? You hear this kind of crap all the time. And none of that lands because the sales guy before you or after you said the same thing. their last IT guy said the same thing. The difference is, how do we approach it? What are we doing differently? And hopefully that has to do with understanding the customer's business, knowing how they ring the cash register, knowing how our technology is going to impact that, and then helping them with big things like strategic planning, because we know eventually we'll have that downtime. And we just need to be open and honest and willing to have conversations like, Mr. Customer, would you still be able to ring the cash register if that thing over there was gone? Right? If that line of business app went down tomorrow, if that computer in the corner that you swipe all the credit cards went down tomorrow, how would that impact your business? Would you be able to ring the cash register? Let's talk about what that technology down response plan really looks like. What do we do if the internet's out for 3 days? My internet service provider emailed me 2 weeks ago and said, you're not going to have internet on the 20th. It's just going to be gone. We're upgrading the neighborhood, and sorry about you, buddy, but we and at least they were nice enough to tell me ahead of time, but they told me to plan on an entire day's outage. What does that do to your company? What does that do to your business, Mr. Customer? I had a client who had a squirrel go crawling in a transformer out on the street and fried himself, but also blew up the circuit to the building, and they were down for 3 days. They had no electricity for 3 days. What does that do to your business? How do you continue to operate? And if we're not having conversations about those kind of things, and the QBR is the chance to start the conversation and maybe sell some professional services where we actually go out and help our client figure out what those next steps look like, what it looks like to build that plan, what it looks like to run a tabletop or do something like that.
And help me understand, because I know that obviously you spend a lot of time thinking about this. How do you think that a QBR would change in the next 5 years? And then, like, I know this is really hard, but like the next 20 years, like what do you think is going to be what's going to change between a perfect QBR now and one in 5 years and one in 20 years? What do you think?
I think what we have to realize and accept is that we're going to own less and less of the solution going forward. We're going to get more.
What do you mean by that?
SaaS isn't going away. The I can swipe my credit card and just go buy the thing I want and deploy it isn't going away.
Mm-hmm.
So, we owned a ton of this when we were able to, go to the customer and say, well, you can't set up an Exchange server without me because I'm the chief network nerd and nobody else knows everything I do. And you must have me in the building to do this, right? They can all run HubSpot. Product-led growth is a phrase I didn't even understand until I came into the software side of the business. But MSPs need to understand that software developers spend a significant amount of time trying to make sure that you can swipe a credit card, sign up for my application, and never have to go seek professional help to use it, because you're more likely to adopt if you don't have to. So software by design is designed to make you not necessary. And you have to figure out a way, and what we're going to have to spend more and more time on as we go is how do we find a way to have the conversations with our customers about inventorying, securing, automating, streamlining those applications that they've cobbled together by swiping our credit card. And I think that's where the conversation is going to go, at least in the next 5 years. 20 years from now, we may be having these terrible conversations about AI and how we're going to do, chat GPT crap in all of our applications. I hope that I'm not excited for you guys for that day, but unfortunately, it's probably a topic you have to talk about now. Right? You need to lay the groundwork for today. Is, do you see a world in which natural language processing or artificial intelligence starts to make its way into your business, Mr. Customer? And maybe that's one of the questions I'm asking when I'm setting up the QBR. And Mr. Customer, we should be talking about, if you're hearing rumblings from vendors about how these things might land in your business in the next couple of years, we should be planning for that today. So
yeah, I mean, I think that, I think there's a few ways you could look at it in terms of like, is this good or bad for MSP market? But I think it's overwhelmingly good in that I think we're living through the data revolution where you've got data on everything, and now you're going to have even more data, and people data will become part of that equation. I really think that that's probably where we're going, and I think that for MSPs, this is a great opportunity for them, to kind of get ahead of the curve here and to really start thinking about, okay, how will this business change and what can I do to address that? And, I also think that if I was internal IT, and granted 5 years ago, I'd be pretty scared. Now I'd be horrified. I mean, I
don't think I would. So Bob Coppedge wrote a book that says, the title of the book is No, I Don't Want Your Job. And it's a book for IT managers that basically MSPs can send to them and say, look, this is how we work together. Because there's a lot we can do to support internal IT. And internal IT is at such a shortage of manpower. I can't imagine running an internal IT department without outside support today.
Right.
There's
I
only
guess
like 4 jobs for every applicant.
10, 15 years ago, the conversation literally was, do we go with internal IT as a long-term solution, or we go external to a managed service provider? You're saying it at the point of like, you've already won by a massive margin. And it's sort of like, I feel bad, I'm not going to take this one person's job, but it's not like they're going to build an internal IT department that's going to, have 20 people inside of it. Like all these, even the largest enterprise companies are now searching for outside help. And there was a time where there was no outside help for businesses. They wouldn't search at all for any outside help, and that they would never live together. And now it's so much so that the MSP market is even having some sympathy for the IT, internal IT, when it was a battle, when we started back 10, 15 years ago.
But this goes back to when you have your QBR, make sure that guy's in the room. Like if you have if you're doing supplemental services for an internal IT department, that guy's one of the influencers who helps make decisions there. He needs to be in the room, and he can't be the only one in the room. And what we really need to be doing is figuring out what is the best use of their resources internally. And it's probably bringing on somebody who owns one of the line of business applications, right? If I have a proprietary line of business app in my space, then I need a guy who can figure out how to set it up, automate it, do the vendor management and relationship management for it. Like that's what internal guys ought to be doing. Whereas external guys, we can do the bigger tasks like security and the cookie cutter tasks like security and help desk and those kind of things that are more repeatable and require less specialized training to know just that one weird line of business application that only that customer uses.
I got a question for you. Do you think that there was going to be a point in time where managed service providers will have essentially like a Salesforce admin on? Because I think about when I was at Datto, we had a whole bunch of internal admins that were just for one app, one Salesforce admin. There was a full. I'd be interested to hear from the MSPs out here. Do you have clients using Salesforce? I mean, it's a big, expensive tool, and traditionally MSPs play a little down market from Salesforce. But we're starting to see more and more MSPs working with much bigger companies who have decided we need to outsource a little bit. We need to bring an MSP in. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody's working with Salesforce. I do think there are those kind of tools that you should either have a relationship with someone you can refer it to, or have someone in-house. And I had a dynamic CRM team that we referred business to. And if somebody came to us and said, hey, we think we need a CRM, we went, well, we can support Dynamics. And I'm quite frankly surprised there isn't someone, and maybe there is someone that's running an MSP now that starts an MSP focused branch that start a company that's essentially like a vendor that has it's not just Salesforce. I mean, you think about all the ERP systems, and you think like NetApp and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm surprised nobody's come up and said, hey, we're the really friendly MSP friendly version of we offer these kind of services. But I think why people haven't done it is because I don't believe the clients go to managed service providers for questions about this kind of stuff. They kind of realize that it's a third-party app that's they go to
But as managed service providers, that's kind of our fault, because
we've
gone to quarterly business reviews. Well, and we've gone to quarterly business reviews and gone, Mr. Customer, let me introduce you to the most boring meeting you'll ever come to. I'm going to go through a bunch of statistics and justify my existence. Then I'm going to ask you to buy something, and then I'll get out of your hair right before you say, Alex, before you go, could we please never do this again? Right? That's the experience that they've had with us. So it's almost our fault that they don't want to come to us with this stuff. But we need to start to turn the page on that and say, let's come have a strategic meeting that is really not a sales pitch. And back to Shane's point, it's not a sales pitch if I sit down with you and say, this is the risk you own. This is the budget if you change nothing. And if you were going to change some things, here's the order I would change them in. Highest priority, next priority, next priority. And if you want to take a look back at your budget, we can talk about if and when it might make sense to do some of those fixes. But you've been informed, you're educated, you now know what you need to do. And we always talk about it, and you actually see it when you bring in a real budget and have this conversation with a customer. You actually see them go, I think it makes sense for me to spend some money to make some of this pain go away. And that's the best sales pitch ever, right?
Yeah.
Customer, you own the risk, it is yours. I couldn't possibly buy enough insurance to cover your risk and mine. So this is yours, you own it. Let's be clear about that. Let's be transparent. And, that's the point at which that risk transference is probably the number one value of a QBR. Letting the customer know really transparently where all the bodies are buried, because we think they know, because we see it all day, every day in the help desk. We know their networks better than they do. And we just make the assumption that they're on the same page with us. And this same page meeting where we kind of put all of that out in front of the customer and let it transition is super valuable. So I would say that's the big thing to me, is just get out there in front of them and stop making excuses for why we didn't find time to do it. If these things aren't paying for themselves, it's probably you. And that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. If it feels like a sales pitch, it's probably you. And those are hard things. Those are hard pills to swallow. And if you want to talk about it, hit me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to just have a conversation with you about your delivery and how that conversation goes to the customer and ways you can flip it on its head and turn it into a consultation. Because at the end of the day, we need to be seen as consultants, not the guy who turns the wrench or turns the screwdriver. And that's when our customer starts to see us with enough value to say, hey, I was thinking about Salesforce. But the flip side to that is, if we're asking the right questions, where is your business going? How are things working for you, et cetera? We have the opportunity to say, customers in a similar situation were very successful with Salesforce, and I have a Salesforce guy on staff. Would you like to talk to him about how we might be able to automate some things in your business? And we have an MSP that uses an ERP solution that way, and then half of their business is ERP automation. And they've got to be a $20 million MSP. They're huge. But they do.
I mean, that project work alone is massive. And then I would say,
think about how sticky it makes you.
The other thing about a QBR is it's your perfect opportunity for you to say, did you know? Did you know? Did you know that did you know this client's finance, did you know that your finance staff has been spending, 10 hours in Excel every single day when you bought an ERP system for them to use?
That should fix some of this. Yep.
Yeah. Did you know? And because they're going to say, no, I didn't know. Like, you're finally, thank you for telling me something, A, that I care about, because it's their job to manage these people. And B, it's something that they didn't know. And
we have to be careful because that person might be sitting in the room, right? If the CFO is sitting in the room, then we have to have a different conversation, which is, hey, you know what, Ian? It looks like you've been spending a ton of time in Excel. Is there something wrong with that ERP system we set up? Because I really felt like it should have taken up some of this for you. Is there somewhere where we dropped the ball, or where this just didn't land the way that it was supposed to? So think about your phrasing and how you have that conversation. Sometimes the person who's the problem is in the room, or the person who's experiencing the problem is in the room. And even if we don't think it's the technology, or even if we think the problem is in the chair, we have to approach it with that almost apologetic, hey, I feel like something's not right. How can we help you fix this? Because I see you're spending 27 hours a week in Excel, and I really expected that number to significantly reduce once we rolled out that ERP solution.
Right. I mean, and it doesn't have to, it can be very much framed as like, a managed service provider. When I think about the optimal relationship between a managed service provider and a client, is it the client thinks about, it's like, what does a managed service provider do? They use technology to solve problems. It's like, and there's so many problems at a business, and some can be solved with technology and some can't. But, the MSP is that business that can solve problems for you using technology. And so if it's always in a non-defensive way of just saying, hey, we can solve this problem with some technology, that's a great thing. It's awesome, because that's what a business owner thinks about all day, is problems. How do I solve problems? And if some of them can be solved using technology, that's a massive win. And they'll, without a doubt, pay for solving a problem. Yep. They don't want to pay for Netgear 1645, that's what they don't want to pay for. They want to pay for solving a problem.
And, to that point, Nathan Parks mentions he's seeing Salesforce in sub 50 employee companies. That's an expensive product to deploy in a sub 50 person
with that company. Essentials version, or what, the Salesforce is trying to penetrate that market.
Yep. Yeah. But if people in that market are willing to spend for Salesforce, guess what? They just told you they're willing to spend on technology. So it's a matter of you having the right conversation to lead them down the path of, it makes sense to spend on this technology. And I really do feel like a lot of the deliverable is just, we're out of practice. We're too worried about the speeds and feeds and the nerd words. And we need to step back and approach the technology from a client-facing perspective of, how does this make their life harder or easier? And what is it about these applications, or the usage of these applications, that we can key in on or home in on to identify a place where the client might have a problem? Because quite often the person who has the problem isn't in the room or doesn't know they have a problem that we can help them fix. And part of it's unearthing that and having that conversation.
Right. And I I like to always, when I do sort of performance reviews, is I always like to kind of bring a few new things into a performance review of an employee, because there's a lot of things that like you always just put on them too much of like they just you assume they know the problems. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just so you're too close to see it. And so the same thing I think with the business owners, you're too close to see some of these problems.
And something I learned again coming over to the software side that I wasn't as good at my MSP, and I know MSPs feel like we always, these guys go leave their MSP job, and all of a sudden they become some talking head in the space, and they're nothing but some old guy who was a washed up MSP just like them, struggling to figure out how to do all this. But one of the things I learned coming over here was that I have to say something 300 times before all of my customers have heard it. And I'm so tired of that talking point. I'm so tired of saying it. And if I just assume that all my customers understand it, to Shane's point earlier, like MFA is important. We know it. It's common sense in our space. To your customer who's a doctor, does he understand the value of it? Probably not. So you're going to have to educate. You're going to be tired of talking about it. It's going to be the 472nd time you've said it, but it still is something that kind of has to happen.
So I got a question here. Should we pick SaaS apps to support that we'll learn well and use ourselves, or should we survey customers first to decide which SaaS apps for us to support? And by the way, now is the time. Throw your questions in. We're going to move on to some questions here.
This is a tough one. And I think that within reason, you can pick some and say, in this category, we're going to provide top-notch support for this one. We always had, as part of the assessment that we performed with our clients, one of the questions was, do we have supportable SaaS applications? And I talked a lot about supportability in my MSP, because I could go align my client with CIS or NIST or CMMC, whatever framework you can imagine. If they've got a WatchGuard firewall and I only know how to use a SonicWall, I'm going to misconfigure it. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn on their dime, and they're going to be down while I'm trying to figure it out. And SaaS applications are no different. So if they use similar SaaS applications to you, you put them in a better spot. So part of getting out ahead of those things is, and talking to your customers and establishing yourself as the expert, it gets you the benefit of being able to say, hey, Ian, since we're talking about this and it sounds like you're interested in a CRM, we're way better at HubSpot than we are at Salesforce. Would it make sense for you to take a look at that one as well? Because I could provide you the best experience using HubSpot. It's actually what we use internally, and we've been really successful with it. That doesn't sound pushy. Just, hey, let's look at all the options. Salesforce is out there. We're really good at HubSpot, and it might be another solution to do the trick. Let's go take a look at both of them. So I would hesitate to have you. I don't want you to go to your customers and say, I'm not going to support your SaaS application because I think it's crap, right? That really comes off as almost combative with our customer. And that's not what we need to be. And we need to accept the fact that there's so many SaaS applications. We're never going to be able to be good at them all. We're going to have to support some stuff that isn't our favorite, unless you're really, really, really niche and your market's so big that you can pick folks who only use a couple of the same applications. The reality of this world is, and you're seeing it on your side as you guys are tracking usage, SaaS application usage is exploding. And it's not just going wide with one SaaS application going out to everybody in the company. It's going deep and wide, right? It's 27, 40, 80 applications going out to more and more and more people. So everybody has access to more SaaS applications. We have to learn how to be adaptive there. We also need to learn how to have the conversation with our customer that I can't possibly be the expert on all of them. If you get to a certain size, it may make sense for you to bring in an internal specialist who is the specialist on all your internal apps and how they work. And we can work with that person to help them tie them all together, set up MFA, set up SSO, unify those apps, share data between them, hook up APIs. But at the end of the day, we can't be the expert on all of them. So you need to have support with those vendors. You can't just buy the cheapest package that comes with send an email and we'll get back to you in 7 days.
Yeah, no, I would say that in our newest engagement release, we're going to have the SaaS app ability to basically audit the SaaS apps that all of your clients are using if they're using Zorus engagement. And I think that's really the place you need to start is like, well, what SaaS apps are they using? And then get to the point of like, yeah, okay, these are my preferred. And I'll support as many as I can. But let me just give you a little bit of context to when you're buying an app and an employee buys an app without your permission, what that really entails, because that's company data that's now being sent somewhere and you don't even know which they're using. So it's kind of open their world to SaaS app conversation. I really think that, if you're doing a QBR and not talking about SaaS apps in any way, then it seems like that's a big red flag.
Totally, 100%. And I think, to Nathan Park's point, you've kind of got to go down that rabbit hole with your customer. Even if they tell you no, don't be afraid to tell your customer, hey, would it be all right if we dig in and collect a little bit more information about these SaaS apps that you're using? There are things that I can do to help you manage license count, manage subscription renewals. If you're tracking their SaaS apps with a tool like ours, or even just with a tool like a configuration in your PSA, let's say you don't have our tool, you're doing this in ConnectWise. I've got to go in ConnectWise. I can create a configuration for their SaaS application. I can document how many licenses. I can document the day that it needs to alert me when the client falls in that little window of, hey, I got to sign a renewal, or I got to send a letter that says I cancel. How great would your customer feel if you were able to come to them and go, hey, that app you've been a little frustrated with, you got to cancel in the next 30 days. You should send that letter. Right. And you could be the reminder for that. But what that also gives you is permission to dig up the invoice and start to put that money on their budget. And I want to just explore that for just a second. Let's say I've got a big Salesforce renewal. I pay for it annually. I get 20% off for buying it annually, and it costs me $50,000 a year. Well, if I'm stroking a check for $50,000 a year, and then Ian comes strolling into my QBR and says, hey, Alex, I'd like you to buy this widget, that widget, and do this big project. Can you do that today? Can you sign on the dotted line for me? I'm going to go, Ian, I am poor. This economy is killing me. I just had to pay for my biggest SaaS application. Thanks, but no thanks. Get the hell out of here. But if Ian walks in my office and goes, hey, Alex, I've got some concerns for you, but it looks like you just paid your Salesforce invoice, or you're about to, and that would probably put a real dent in my pocket as a business owner. I can only imagine what that's done to you. It's probably the wrong time to talk about this, but I have to get this out and let you see it. When would it make sense for us to address it? Is that 2 months from now? Is it 4 months from now? What kind of time do you need to recover from this, from writing this big check? All of a sudden, I'm not selling you on whether or not you're going to buy the thing. I'm just asking you when you're going to spend the money to fix the problem. And those are two way different conversations. One's really a whole lot easier to say in a consultative fashion, and it feels like I'm looking out for my customer. And the other makes someone who's probably a technical person who's not real comfortable in sales feel like I've got to go out and close the deal, and I got to do this. I got to perform some Jedi mind trick to get him to say yes. So the budget's really your friend in just seeing when you've got some competition from all those SaaS apps that are in your client's inventory. And that budget's going to be, in that high peak when you don't want to be asking them to spend money.
Yeah, no, I agree. And was that in reference to, did you see Zachary's point in the chat? How you tackle clients who express a desire to stay away from when it comes to their IT budget?
So clients who don't want to get involved in the budget process, I assume he means?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
About SaaS pricing specifically.
Yeah, I think that there are clients who are going to be closed vested about it, right? Who don't want to show you all the invoices and let you see what they spend, or maybe clients who just hate SaaS altogether. I think those folks are just going to be in for a rude awakening and going to have to come along for the ride. Even Microsoft is kind of stopping those on-prem applications and those kind of things. But the clients, what I think you'll find is the clients who are afraid that if they show you the invoice, you're going to know how much they spend and try and spend every dollar, and they hold all that stuff close to the vest. They're probably also not your best client. They probably don't buy the things you tell them to do, follow all your other best practices. And it's probably just one more symptom of a larger problem. What I've typically done with those clients is fake it and put together a budget and say, hey, Mr. Customer, I added a handful of numbers on here. They're probably all wrong, but I want you to see the concept of what we're going after. So I've laid out for you a 5-year budget and a 12-month budget. And these are going to show you kind of the ebbs and flows here near term, exactly when I'm going to buy Zach a new PC and when I'm going to buy Ian a new PC, et cetera, but also long term when that worst budget time is coming, so that you have an idea what's going on. Like, this is explain to them, show them the why, and then they're less worried about you getting access to that info. Otherwise, leave them with a budget with some wrong numbers in a spreadsheet and say, hey, then you put your own numbers in, clean it up, use it as you want. You will have clients who are so immature that they don't do budgeting and don't care to do budgeting. And guess what? As your MSP matures, you'll outgrow those clients. And one day they will come to you and say, hey, Zachary, I just feel like you've really grown your business. You guys are blowing up and you're doing great things. And you're probably too big and too fancy for me now. We're probably not a good fit. And they'll help themselves out the door. And that's probably okay. There is an operational maturity level where you'll outgrow some of your clients. And I hate to see it, but it happens. And those who are willing to learn from you and come along for the ride, they'll have a better experience. And those who aren't, probably were not your best customer, and we're going to get breached under your watch at some point anyway.
And they would have blamed you, even though that you told them that it was like, hey.
Well, and even if they don't, even if they're like, hey, Zach, I don't blame you for it, but then their insurance company's going to come in and go, well, he might not blame you, but I've got to get a pound of flesh from somebody, and they're going to come after you. So, it's all about defensible positioning in this world. It's unfortunately the world we live in.
Agreed.
And no better place than the QBR to set up your defensible positioning, if you ask me.
All right. I think we've made it to the closing statements here.
Yeah.
So, Alex, thank you for your time and for joining us. If you were to say anything about chasing the perfect QBR after this whole conversation, what would it be? What's the last thing in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, all I'm going to say is make it about your customer. If you feel like you're going in to justify your existence, you've already lost. It's got to be about your customer. It's got to be about the future and where they're going. And the last thing I'll steal is a quote from Colin Powell, who says, if I have to make an important decision, I want you to give me between 30 and 70% of the information. With less than 30% of the information, I make the wrong mistake every time. And with more than 70% of the information, I'm going to get tied up in the weeds and either make the decision too late because I'm trying to process all the information, or never make a decision at all. And so the conversation there is around bring what's important to your customer, take out all the nerd words and all the tech, and find that happy medium, that 30 to 70% where the customer feels informed enough to make a decision and not tied up in the details.
Awesome.
And Ian, I just want to reiterate really quick, because there was a lot of chat about this. This has been recorded. We could send it out and it will be on our website. And if you did miss episode 1, that is currently on our website, if you would like to check that out, but this could be sent to you. It'll be online. So do not worry about getting a copy of this.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.